Minister. Meanwhile, the BJP win has India's low-cost housing sector in high spirits thanks to its election promise of homes for all through a low-cost housing policy. Will the Modi effect finally mean inclusion of the poor in India's housing sector? The crusaders of low-cost homes are definitely hoping so. Nikhil Sivadas joins us with this report.
Narendra Damodar Das Modi.
As Narendra Modi swears in to become the 15th Prime Minister of India, there's a sense of excitement in the air. Nowhere is this more evident than in the low-cost and affordable housing sector. And why not? After all, the BJP in its manifesto has promised a home for every family in the next 8 years.
I think BJP has sent a very clear message, and it's the need of the hour. The entire country has been busy servicing the rich and the middle class. But when it comes to affordable housing, everybody talks about it and nobody really does anything about it.
Data from ASSOCHAM indicates that there's a shortfall of nearly 19 million homes for the economically weaker sections, the low-income group and the middle-income group in India. Government schemes for low-cost housing like the Rajiv Awas Yojana and the Affordable Housing in Partnership have not had an impact.
There's a huge housing shortfall in the affordable housing area spectrum, less than 20 lakhs. It's well known, it's well documented, it's been discussed thoroughly for over a decade now. We now need to see action in this space.
Here, the sector is drawing hope from Narendra Modi's efforts in Gujarat, where the government has focused on low-cost housing efforts by allowing developers to build on public land by subsidizing costs, or incentivizing them to build on private land in return for higher FSI. While the BJP has not released any details for its national low-cost housing policy as yet, here is what developers and industry experts are expecting from the government.
Higher FSI, low cost of land, speedy approval process, and availability of cheap capital to construct the project. And then, of course, all the technology-related, equipment-related incentives and the income tax incentive to promote low-cost housing. These are the critical aspects.
There has been a claim that affordable housing sector should be called infrastructure, not so much because one feels it's infrastructure like road and railways, but the regulations keep changing and it's better to tag on to a sector so that changes that are made for that sector automatically flow into the other one. That could also make a significant change.
Developers and industry experts that NDTV spoke to have said that the Narendra Modi government has already been in touch with several of them to understand their concerns. That is a sign that the government is considering the sector seriously. But the big question is, will they be able to galvanize the low-cost and affordable housing sector on a national scale? That's because housing is still a state subject. While Narendra Modi may have been able to incentivize affordable housing in Gujarat, doing it on a pan-India level is a different task altogether. However, experts are hoping that if the various BJP-led state governments implement a comprehensive policy, then other state governments will follow suit. From Mumbai, Nikhil Sivadas, NDTV.
Let's slug it out a little bit more from some of the crusaders that I've been speaking about. Vikram Jain, lead low-income housing practice monitor Deloitte, and Rohit Poddar, MD Poddar Developers Limited. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me. First of all, I must ask you, Vikram, are you excited or do you think the expectations are too high?
I'm definitely very hopeful. I think the whole country is very hopeful. Thank you, Maisha, for having me on the show.
All right. Okay. What about you? From a developer's perspective, Rohit, I know that you've been managing to do what many developers find very challenging, to deliver affordable and low-cost housing. Do you think that if they were just to implement what was there in their manifesto, BJP could really look at narrowing the big gap that we have on the low-cost housing front in the country?
It's certainly very possible, and certainly it's very much the need of the hour. And let's hope they come up with a strong enough policy which has buy-in from the state governments as well.
Okay. So, Vikram, what is it within the manifesto which gives you positive hope? And do you think that, the policy actually hasn't been outlined in detail? It's just an intention, or to say that, yes, this is the way we would like to go. To achieve that goal, though, what is it that the new government and the ministry will have to do?
So I think the intention has been very clearly laid out both in the manifesto and in the various, meetings or speeches that we have heard from Mr. Modi ji. So I think the intention is definitely there. We are definitely very hopeful that, the square focus on affordable housing and how we can promote affordable housing so that we bridge the gap for the poor in India is a great sign. Of course, there are, it's easier said than done, but we are extremely hopeful. A lot of things could be done, and things like getting single window clearance, allowing more easier credit options both for developers and for the low income customers. I think a lot of those would go a long way.
All right, so Vikram, the biggest demand I think from a developer's perspective has been that give us public land to do low-cost housing, otherwise it's not going to be possible. Do you think that's a very, very valid demand? And of course, the other big one, which is give us an infrastructure status and tax benefits which accompany that status.
I think allowing more public land or allowing construction on public land would definitely increase the supply. We just have to be careful how that land is given away. So as long as it's given out in a transparent manner in a bidding process, I think that's great. But ultimately, I think there is, 19 million or 22 million, whatever is the number, it's so huge that I think we'll have to explore ways even beyond public land. So I think the cities have to grow. Probably you have to have new cities, infrastructure has to be laid out of the cities. So all of that has to be done to really bridge like 19 million new homes coming in. That's a huge number. So I think that helps. That to me I think is one of the biggest things that needs to be done. So adding infrastructure status to the industry would help, would probably, again, I don't think it's going to be like it's definitely going to help, but I think there are a lot of other policy measures which could have a much bigger impact.
Okay. Rohit,
So
you don't
things
think
like
that that's a
faster-
crying requirement? Just getting the infrastructure status and also public land, because I think also it would be good to distinguish between low cost housing and affordable homes. Maybe affordable homes are possible even on private land and without the infrastructure status, but low cost housing specifically for the economically weaker segment, is that possible as well?
I personally am not of the opinion to have land given away for free on a public housing basis. I think it's going to be quite difficult to get the corporate governance part right, personally speaking. But I think you can debottleneck the process to manufacture a house in many ways. For example, we can't borrow money from a bank to basically buy land for the economically weaker section. Approvals take as long for our projects as any other kind of project in the city, including a high-end project. Environmental clearance is another sort of long-term, 1.5 year wait. Also, I think that the government should actually, say for example, in a city like Mumbai, where you have the mass urban transport system of the railway, very often it's the chicken or the egg situation, right? The government says, we won't increase the train frequency until you have population living in the site, which is of course on the outskirts of the city, the periphery of the suburbs, so to speak. But people won't go and live there unless you have a transport system available to transport them to work frequently. You can't have a 45-minute wait for a train as opposed to a 15-20 minute wait. So I think the government needs to decide on certain areas which are of course going to be in the outskirts of the city, to say, okay, we're going to promote these areas for the benefits of the economically weaker section. And you know what, we'll provide water, electricity, sewage treatment plant system, and of course mass urban transport system. Maybe social infrastructure like status for schools or shops for them. Those I think will help more practically speaking than having basically the concept of having land given by the government. I think that's a far-flung possibility from
Fair
a
enough.
practical execution perspective.
So I think Vikram and Rohit, both of you are in sync. Vikram, that's exactly what you've been also saying, that what's important is to create new cities at the outskirts, because there is only that much of land within the middle of the current city. So then it comes to a question of actually having physical infrastructure to transport all those people there. Is that the model that you're looking at to basically bridge the gap of 19 million homes?
Yeah, from our perspective, we definitely feel the private sector has to play a big part. And for the private sector, so what can the government do to catalyze private sector to play a big part in this? I think, like Rohit mentioned, giving them faster approvals would definitely go a long way. Laying out infrastructure on the outskirts of the city where the city is expanding would have a big impact. I think even to some extent, getting access to credit both for developers and customers, there was interest subvention schemes, those kind of things would really help. I think those are the top 2 or 3 things which I think will go a long way to get private sector in. Once private sector starts producing low income housing, I think the sector will pick up, and that's when we'll see a lot more action coming in.
Okay. Rohit, just a very quick question. Banks or financial institutions are reluctant to lend for low-cost housing. It's not just to developers, but even to the end consumer and buyers, because NPA, non-performing assets on that front, are higher than your regular home finance. So is that a challenge as well in terms of, how do these people actually put together the basic kitty to buy a home from the developers? And therefore, will the developers make enough money on low-cost housing projects without the tax stops?
Okay, you have 2 sides. You've got the supply side and you've got the demand side. On the supply side, basically you need to have, of course, raw material, which is the land, which is the primary shortage of fund availability, because the RBI doesn't allow you to borrow money to basically buy land. But subsequent to that, once you have approvals in place, a host of banks are willing to give you money from a construction loan perspective. So there's been no problem for that whatsoever. On the consumer financing side, as in a home loan, there's no shortage there's no shortage whatsoever of a customer getting a home loan. Just to correct a common fallacy, the NPAs for home loans in the affordable housing or the economically weaker section are much less than the conventional housing section. So in fact, there's been no problem. I mean, we have relationships with many even microfinance companies, and they've been chided in terms of taking a non-aggressive policy because they hardly have any NPAs at all. So I don't think that's the actual reality. The issue is getting the stock out at a reasonable price to customers, and then, like has been mentioned in the BJP manifesto and also by Shri Piyush Goyal and also the new finance minister, that maybe an interest subvention scheme for the end-use customer, which has got to sort of catch up over a 10-year period, which will probably end up at 0.5% of GDP or something of that nature. That would be something which could generate more customers to come in to be able to pay for the EMI. But in my view, the EMI also is something which is manageable by them. The biggest issue is, how does a customer pay 20% down payment? If, for example, in Mumbai, you have an economically weaker section unit of, say, 1-room kitchen at 10 lakhs, and the criteria is to put down 2 lakhs, where does the customer get 2 lakhs of rupees in savings from at that income level? Servicing the EMI, I think, is much less of an issue for them than putting down the down payment.
All right.
So that's something they can actually think of as well as a policy.
Okay, Vikram. So we are hoping that one big thing which BJP manifesto talks about, massive low-cost housing program to ensure every family will have a pakka house of its own by 2022. Give me 3 things that the current government needs to do immediately to meet that goal.
3 things I would say are: 1, set up some kind of a framework where approvals are tracked, monitored and delivered quickly. So a framework where people can see how long it's taking for approvals to get through, a framework where people can see how much even affordable housing projects are taking, approvals are taking for affordable housing projects to get through. So some kind of framework or some kind of availability of this data, or even pushing this so that this happens. That's number 1. The second thing which I would do is build out more infrastructure. Like Rohit was also mentioning, land is a key raw material. The more infrastructure you build out, the more land becomes accessible, on which people can live and commute to cities. So laying out infrastructure would be the second biggest thing. And then I think if I had to pick a third, I would say some sort of an interest subvention scheme for the really poor would go a long way, so that it enables them to get into this first house, which is, you know, really a big challenge, and also a big step up for them.
Vikram Jain and Rohit Poddar, thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining me on this discussion. So low-cost housing is big on the new government's agenda, and we are hoping and keeping our fingers crossed that by 2022, every Indian will have a pakka home to live in.